Thank you.
It's 2 o'clock, so we'll go ahead and start with the budget workshop 2. And I'm going to turn it over to the city manager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Good afternoon, members of council, to the members of the public watching at home, and to our staff here that are with us today. Thank you for being with us for our second budget workshop of the fiscal year 2024 budget season. I mentioned this in our last budget workshop, but I have to stress it again. There has been a yeoman's amount of work that has gone on behind the scenes from our amazing staff here at the city of Sandy Springs. I would be remiss if I did not take a few minutes to thank our CFO, Tony Carlisle, Michael Heater, our budget manager, Kristen, Lynn, and our entire senior leadership team. And last but certainly not least, Caroline Galvin, who has truly done an amazing job keeping us all on task, organized, and our presentation materials ready for you today. So jumping right in, just a quick recap of the budget calendar, which you saw in our last budget workshop on May 2nd. These dates have not changed. Today's goal is to review the answers to the workshop 1 questions that council asked, and then we'll also go over the results of the ballot. Thank you for returning your ballot. We have averaged those scores, and I will show you towards the end of the session today where the projects ranked out. Next Tuesday will be the actual presentation of the manager's proposed budget. That'll be followed on June 6th by workshop 3, which I'll get your feedback all along the way to culminate on June 20th with our second public hearing and our budget adoption for 24. As I mentioned, the goals of today's workshop are to receive feedback and direction from council as we continue our work on the FY 2024 budget. We're going to review and validate our 24 budget planning assumptions, both operations and capital, and then also understand the variety of priorities and needs that are key to our service delivery and capital programs. Sandy Springs has always been built on a foundation of conservative financial management. That definitely ties over to our budget process. We conservatively determine our revenues and expenditures every year. We are a firm believer in underestimating the amount of revenue that we will receive so that we avoid unwarranted and ugly surprises at the end of the budget year. We also firmly believe that you do not use one-time revenue sources for ongoing expenses. That is why we only use fund balance reserve and any overages that we may collect from year to year to pay for capital projects, because that is not a reliable source of funding year after year. So now, if there are no questions before we dive in, we're going to walk through the questions that were asked during our last budget workshop. First up, we had, I went too fast. I'm sorry. First up, we had a question about wanting to see the actual estimated increase and decrease. I realize this is a little bit hard to see. You have a printed copy in front of you on the slides there. This is slide number 6. This year, our interest payment and our principal payment for the Public Facilities Authority for debt and interest on this facility, as well as on the the police headquarters and municipal court facility, is actually decreasing by $2,700. We have an increase of $15,000, which is the annual escalator as established by the contract for our call center subcontractor agreement. I'm happy to report that our share of the increase for the North Fulton Regional Radio Authority has actually decreased since the last meeting that we had 2 weeks ago to $873. We also have an increase in our nonprofit funding to have us at $700,000. Later in the slides today, Kristen is going to walk through. We had a question from council during the last budget workshop about including Solidarity Sandy Springs. We have some information to share with you on that request. We also are projecting an increase in the city's general liability insurance of $163,000. 6% cost of living adjustment for city employees will be an increase of $2.2 million. The reason the number shows $23,000 here is that the cost of living amount in 23 included the full implementation of our pay plan. So we are annualizing that amount plus adding an additional 6% this year. Health insurance increases are projected to be $1.6 million to bring us to $8 million. Jennifer and I have already begun discussions about what we can do to lower that amount, including rebidding our health insurance. We've been with Cigna for a number of years, but we believe there are some planned tweaks that can be made to enhance the benefit levels to our employees while lowering the premium costs that we are paying. Animal control, this is still a projection because it is subject to renegotiation this year with Fulton County. We're projecting an increase of $50,000. Debt service on our fire trucks will increase $90,000 to 1.23. We know there will be an increase in our jail services cost. At this point, we are still in discussions with Smyrna and do not have a firm number. We are hopeful to get that ironed out in the next couple of weeks. Our public works subcontractor agreements, we bid those out during the FY23 fiscal year, and we are actually seeing a decrease of $335,000 to bring that to 5.3 million. Recreation and parks, we bid that out this fiscal year as well, and we are seeing an increase of $250,000. I'm also happy to report that I successfully negotiated a lower increase in the remaining rent for the buildings that we occupy at 7840 Roswell Road by police and municipal court. Initially, they had proposed $18.50 a square foot. We have reduced that to $16.50 a square foot. That will keep us there until we move our police and court operations into their new home on Morgan Falls Road. And then also the continuation of our EMS subsidy with AMR. Any questions? Yes, sir.
So if I take column 1 and add 2.4 million to column 1, I don't get column 3. Tell me why that is. 35.8 is 2 million more than 33.8. Yet we got another 400,000 in there somewhere. Let me drop the number here.
And it's interesting because we've triple checked these numbers today.
I believe you.
Let us figure out the calculation difference on that.
Fair enough.
I think I missed what you said regarding the Parks and Rec.
Yes, ma'am.
You said that again, or the 250?
We bid out our our Parks and Recreation subcontractor agreements earlier this year, and we're seeing an increase in the cost to provide those services. This is the lawn care, the landscaping maintenance, the parks upkeep.
Okay, any particular service?
Landscaping in particular has seen a significant increase.
Have you explained scope?
Scope.
That's a big jump.
Is Michael here?
I am.
Michael, would you please speak to that?
I am. Yeah, so if y'all remember, 2 years ago, we had a contract, I think it was Yellowstone. And maybe the amount was around $700,000 for the contract. You know, we added on South Greenway, we added on Northwood, we added several things we added and extended that. The next vendor was Georgia Green, and they came in around $300,000. So there was a savings of about $400,000. What we found, and you'll be hearing about a little bit of that. This is a little background for tonight, actually. The service went down. You know, it's more than mowing. It's mowing, it's edging, it's blowing, it's pre-emergent, post-emergent, turf care, et cetera, et cetera. Well, the reason that cost was so low is because they just didn't do it. And tonight we're replacing them. And to replace them, it went up from 200. It went up from. It's going to go up. It's going to go up. We added additional dollars in there before the contractors bid, because again, you're going to see it tonight. So there's probably a little bit more in there than we need, but it wasn't at the time. You're going to get a contract to you tonight for gosh, 375,000, I think, compared to the 250 or 300 it was previously. And 3 or 4 years before that, it's 700. So it's just trying to get the contract. We went through a qualification process this time, rather than just a low bid. Previous time was low bid. There was no reason to disqualify them, so we tried them. It didn't work. So we've gone back up with a heightened scope of work. Also, the trash pickup went up. Both Public Works and Recreation Parks use pro coatings. Their contract went up. On both sides, so some of that's in there as well.
One thing, so if I'm looking at the like the financials, which line items would those contract be under, would it be under contractual services or?
Yes, they're contractual services. And the next meeting, you'll get the line item detailed by department so that you can line these up. Any other questions? Okay. Next, we'd had Carolina, it's not going forward. We'd had a question come up about the breakdown of sworn personnel within the Sandy Springs Police Department. Currently, we have a total of 190 full and part-time personnel. That does include civilian at the top. The bottom is the breakdown, but for all sworn personnel within the police department. Okay, we had a question for the Sandy Springs Fire Department about the cost of defibrillators. As you all will recall, we elected this last year because it was more cost effective to lease the defibrillators instead of purchasing new ones. The cost for one defibrillator is $41,000. The cost to lease 10 is $90,000 per year. And this will allow us to have new equipment and replace them instead of having to outlay all of the cash at one time. We'd also had a question about the cost of one dose of Narcan. That is estimated at approximately $40 per dose. Each fire truck houses 2 doses, and 16 doses are also housed on trucks with another 16 in reserve. And then we currently have 65 doses in our inventory. This is separate from the amount that AMR also carries. Within our paramedics, we had a request for the number of paramedics that the city employs in the fire department. We have 38 total, 34 who work on shift at our stations and 4 here based at headquarters. We'd had a question about the breakdown of incidents by station. This shows you those numbers by station, and we're giving you a 3-year trend. The blue is 2020, 2021 is orange, gray is 22. Station 2 or 52, as reflected here, has always been our busiest station, and that continues to hold true. Okay, next. We had a question about the Abernathy Art Center and our plans for going forward. We are continuing our discussions with Art Sandy Springs for ongoing programming. Currently, they are estimating the need for a subsidy of approximately $60,000 to continue those operations. However, to help lower that cost, we are assessing the condition of existing facilities to determine, can we allow them to add back in pottery programs, which would lessen the need for additional subsidies. Part of that is assessing the kiln and the condition of that, the electrical, and then also the plumbing, so that you can have water mixed with clay that would run through the water pipes. This amount is not included in today's budget estimates, but we're working to try to get that number to include in our recommended budget next week.
And what department would that be under?
It's under Rec and Park. Next question was about the maintenance of an artificial turf here at City Green. As proposed, the cost of installing that turf is estimated at $408,000. Currently, we are paying approximately $25,000 a year to maintain the turf. That includes maintenance, top dressing, aeration, chemical applications at $10,000 a year. Replacement turf is $30,000 a year. That's the smaller area, which you're seeing that we had to cut up out here over the last 2 weeks and replace because of dead and dying sections. If we have an ice rink, that replacement number will go up to $50,000 because it will kill the entire area that on top of. And then water and irrigation is also estimated at $6,000. In comparison, if we were to move forward with artificial turf, it's estimated to cost us about $4,500 a year for maintenance. That would include annual inspection and testing, the monthly grooming and checking to add in additional crumb rubber if necessary, and then the post-event maintenance. Turf life expectancy on average is about 8 years, but that is dependent on use. For example, Hammond, which we replaced last year, was 11 years old. It was well beyond when it should have been replaced, but we would anticipate this could last up to 10 years depending upon the number of hours that it is utilized. It is roughly a break-even calculation. We would see an ROI at about 9 years if we were moving forward with the artificial turf option. Next, please. There was a question about an update on the Georgia Commission on the Holocaust Museum and Gallery. Hauser Walker has been meeting with the commission to continue their design efforts for the area of the project. The city also contracted with Consult Econ to do a review of the potential usages of the second floor of the project. We'll be giving that report to council pretty quickly to seek guidance on how we are moving forward with the project design, and then Hauser Walker would begin design. Next question was about recreation and park and the intergovernmental agreements. Currently, our IGA for Sandy Springs Middle School expires February of 24. We are beginning to explore the opportunities with the school to continue that partnership. There was also a question about programming comparisons 2019 to 2023 year to date. And you can see how those numbers have fluctuated over time, but have really rebounded since the pandemic. Next, there was a question about Beautification Project, what we call T4000. This has a proposed investment of $125,000, and the funds are used for right-of-way appearance work. This program was created in fiscal year 19. We've spent in total, or excuse me, we budgeted in total $912,000 for this project since 2019. That work has included interstate wildflower planting, pruning of crepe myrtles on Roswell Road, cleaning of sidewalks and decorative retaining walls, sod installation and replacement, the work that you see going on now at Abernathy and Johnson Ferry with the 3 corners, repairs to decorative screen walls and established streetscape areas, and then paint and staining existing concrete strain poles. The next slide. Yes, ma'am.
On the crepe myrtle pruning.
Uh-huh.
Is that predominantly the crepe myrtles that are north of Dalrymple Spalding? I just wanted to ask why those were planted there, because they're right underneath the power lines, so they have to be cut off almost every year.
As it was before my time, but as memory serves, it was actually a beautification project to create more of a boulevard appearance in that section of Roswell Road. Mayor or Councilman DeGiulio or Councilman Paulson may recall differently with that, but
I was saying different materials may save this money in the future, because and they kind of look bad once you keep lopping the crepe myrtles off like that.
we had not cut those in probably 8 or 9 years. So that was one of the reasons why we had to trim them this year.
That's gonna be a big deal replacement for that.
We can look at a replacement in the future, some type of,
Say, I don't know how much that costs today.
okay.
Do you know how much T4000 has in it now?
Can you pull the balance that we have? Which would also include the encumbrance that's already going on for the Johnson Ferry Abernathy work.
Okay.
That is included in that.
And so whatever is in there, but will it stay? Or it will
Anything
stay
that-
and
Because it's a capital project, anything that isn't expended by 6:30 rolls to the next. The next slide shows what we're proposing to utilize the $125,000 on in this upcoming fiscal year. Replanting the Northside Drive interchange, cleaning 90,000 linear feet of sidewalk, which is a little bit difficult to see on the screen here, but the map has the routes that would be cleaned in gray. We can get you a bigger picture of that if you would like that. And then the strain poles on Abernathy are beginning to look faded and kind of dingy and are in need of being repainted and stained. Okay. Yes. You, okay, Tony, please.
The total available in T4000 is $478,516.45. Of that amount, $102,000 is encumbered.
So we have 300 and change.
It's 478 of that.
Okay.
Of that balance is.
How do we pick what goes into this? We make recommendations or?
Yes, council can make recommendations of areas that need improvement. These have typically come about from either public inquiry or staff coming in with a proposal or council bringing us some suggestions. Okay, next slide. Signature events. We had a request for a breakdown on the estimated number of attendees. What we are showing you is the 2022 estimated attendance, as well as the projected attendance that we believe we'll see at our events this year in 2023. We've also added to this the cost, the proposed budget for each of these events, which brings the total to $992,000.
I was trying to, when I looked at these numbers, like 4,500 for concert by the Springs, are you saying that that's what it's gonna be total, and City Ring Live 12,000? These are different numbers than I saw. Or, so these are the numbers that you were projecting for total?
Yes.
Okay,
That is correct. We decided it was more accurate to show you annual attendance there than per event
yeah,
attendance.
okay.
Okay. We also had a request and a question about the fall festival. I know all of us loved attending the Sandy Springs Fall Heritage Sandy Springs Festival that used to be held on Sandy Springs Circle. We are looking to reboot that this fall. The tentative dates are September 28th and 30th. We think that some fresh branding would be appropriate since we would be moving this over onto Bluestone Road and Hildebrand Drive. It would run from Galambos Way on Bluestone down to Sandy Springs Place, right before you get into City Walk. And then on Hildebrand, it would run from Sandy Springs Circle to just before the entrance of Bluestone condos. We would have 2 stages of music and food and artists and craftsmen all along the way. We're thinking of calling it the Bluestone Arts and Music Festival.
Sandy Springs Circle would be open
Yes,
for this scenario.
it would be. That one also became problematic because of the hill and people walking in the street. This would be a little easier.
Now, is this the cost, net cost to us or the total cost?
This is
Because there's
total,
gotta be some revenue coming in.
right? This is the total cost. And we are working on a plan to offset some of these costs through some sponsorships.
Well, also we normally in the past we had vendors, didn't they pay?
Vendors
fees?
would pay fees, yes, sir, but we're not anticipating the public paying for a ticket to enter. You tend to get better
Yeah.
foot traffic if it's just open, but we would also have alcohol sales and we'd have our own food sales that would help offset some of this.
I think not having a entrance fee is important,
I do too,
open for everybody.
agree.
And this doesn't include. Well, my questions, this does not include the police and security time that would be. Is that right?
So if it's an event that's here at City Hall and we're not having to do, or I should say City Springs, and we're not having to have overnight security, no, that would be coming out of the PD budget. We would most likely need overnight security for this, so that would be billed to this budget, that portion of it. But we're looking at how we can be more consistent in how we charge public safety services for these events.
So the revenue model for this hasn't been built yet.
No, sir, not yet.
Are these slides posted
Mhm.
on the website?
They should be in the teapot. Are they live?
They are.
They are.
And so don't forget, typically with these festivals. Given all the money that gets expended, there is an insurance policy that can, you know, that.
Mhm, I do.
You can buy a weather policy.
Oh, yes. Which actually is very important.
Yeah, I mean, it's tied to measurable rain.
Mhm. Okay, I'm going to ask Kristen to come up and chat with you all about solidarity and a couple more slides.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. So during our last session, you all asked about funding for Solidarity Sandy Springs. And as we all know, Solidarity is a group that really got going during the pandemic. They were just trying to feed people at the time, so they didn't really have the data that we were looking for to be able to provide regular funding to them. I went out and met with them last week and sat down. They now have a full-time executive director, which is great. So we talked through, how they're tracking data today, what changes they could potentially make should you all wish to provide funding to them. So what you see here on the screen, they actually provided to us, and this is a map showing the zip codes from which people are coming to Solidarity. So you can see that it's much broader than just the city of Sandy Springs. And right now they're only tracking zip code data. This is important to know because when I sat down with them, we did talk about how if they were going to receive funding from the city, they would need to start asking for specific address data, and we would only be able to provide funding for Sandy Springs residents to directly benefit those residents. So that's something that they could change with their intake
They don't
forms.
do that now.
They don't do that now, but that is something we talked about they could change. So when we talked through this, they are requesting $75,000. They anticipate that this would provide food for 3,750 families and could serve about 300 families per week for an estimated 12 and a half weeks. Generally speaking, they provided us with some data about what they've been doing. So it looks like since October of 2022, that's when they really started tracking their data a little bit better. So between October and April, they served 14,787 families. So that's an average of about 500 per week, but they don't limit families to only coming once per week. So those numbers could be duplicated. There could be, the same family coming 3 times per week or that sort of thing. So right now, that's not something that they are tracking. According to their data, 77% of those that they serve are repeat customers. So that's where they are today. We haven't added anything into the budget, so we'll be looking for your feedback on whether or not this is something that you all would like to add into the nonprofit funding line.
How hard is it for them to track the stuff we need in order to include them?
So it kind of depends on what those things are. Specifically, the address data sounds like something that they can do. They won't, it's different than CAC because at CAC, when you come in, they're going to get all of your information and they're going to track you from start to finish. So it's a little bit different in that, you're coming in and I think the way that it works is that you fill out information on an iPad. I think you can also decline to provide certain information. So they would have to then take their forms, change their form, which is easy enough to do so that people actually provide their data. Then they have to make sure that, they go through the list and geolocate so that they are only providing us with Sandy Springs addresses. Because some people may use Atlanta for their address, even though they're in Sandy Springs, that sort of thing.
Are they reluctant to do this? Some people don't, but one of the keys to this op is everybody gets food when they show up, doesn't matter who they are. That's been their philosophy. This gets a little more restrictive.
And that is still their philosophy. So that would not change. And that was something we very specifically talked about because I did share with them, because of that philosophy, they wouldn't be eligible for certain other kinds of funding from us. But for this, as long as they can drill down to at least a portion of people getting their actual full address and knowing that they're Sandy Springs residents, that is data that we could then use to provide funding directly. So it wouldn't be that we are funding everybody who comes in for 12 and a half weeks. It would only be those who provide their data.
Thanks for doing that.
Well, having observed the people who are there, I mean, these are some of the neediest people in Sandy Springs, so I would suggest highly that we go ahead and help. I mean, it's, I read someplace where in the country, we throw away like 48% of our food or some astronomical number like that. And here we have people in Sandy Springs, which, let's face it, we're all a little bit better off than most. And we have people who really need this help. And I think we should definitely do what we can do to help them.
I agree with that.
The 180 for the that's being proposed for community assistance center.
Mhm.
Do we have a sense of about how much of that's going to go to their food distribution?
So largely what historically CAC has used our funding for is to provide rental assistance. So this is an increase, a proposed increase of $80,000 to what we have historically provided. So they could potentially use it for other purposes, but largely it's been for rent for people to date. So I don't think it necessarily duplicates because CAC mostly uses our funding for rental assistance and not necessarily for their food pantry.
Oh, okay. So it sounds like a proposal wasn't really required. I guess there's just understanding as to what general services a nonprofit.
So CAC provides a slew of services. And that's all included in their proposal in terms of, here's the impact of this nonprofit on the community. But specifically, when they come to us at the end of the year and they send us the invoice, it's sort of listed out by address and amount for rental assistance. I think that's, one of the easier things to document residency, and they can provide that really easily to get to the reimbursable amount, because that's how we operate with these grants.
One more question, it's just kind of, I'm just curious, so if, for example, if I have a nonprofit and I don't know, I'm doing something in the city, I'm interested in potentially putting myself and my organization forward, what would that process be like, or what are you looking for in nonprofit partners?
So the only ongoing sort of recurring request that we put out for nonprofits is our arts and recreation grant that we have been doing for the past couple of years. And that one we put out an RFP and we ask them to give us a proposal for how they would spend the money, that sort of thing. And we award those on an annual basis. The nonprofit program that you see here has largely just been ongoing. And we haven't sort of gone out to the community and said, hey, give us a proposal to include other nonprofits in this list. So right now there isn't necessarily a program for that. This came up at the request of council.
So at some point, a question that I'm going to have, probably not this fiscal year, but a question I'm going to have is that the best approach today with these funds? But I'm not ready yet.
Thanks. You got it.
And if I may add a little bit, this, some years back, the city decided not to get into this directly. So we don't have a social services department necessarily, but we have nonprofits that the city deemed as satisfying the social services aspect. So that we didn't have to do it ourselves in the city. We supported those that did. That's how CAC wound up getting their funding. And that's really continued ever since.
Yes, it has.
I think that's really a good job.
I think that's like a really interesting idea. So what I'm curious about is how much of these dollars are going to what sort of social services, and are we still happy with that distribution? At some point, I'm really curious about that.
And I did talk with CAC, and Francis is more than happy to come to a future work session. That was another question of council last time. So we will have Francis on an upcoming work session for you all he'll present, what they've been working on, and you'll get to see how the city's dollars are being utilized. Okay. Also during our last session, we talked about waste and recycling. So this slide is a little bit underwhelming because our waste haulers provide really terrible data, and there's no way around that. You can see here, Waste Management just hasn't even provided their FY23 reports, but they're one of our largest haulers in the city. So the other issue with this data is that, what you see in the number of customers column, that could be, 38 customers, that could be 38 HOAs. It depends on how they define a customer. So this data in and of itself is really challenging to make anything out of. However, we get really excellent data from Keep North Fulton Beautiful. So this is quarter over quarter for 2021 and 2022. So in calendar year 2021, at Keep North Fulton Beautiful Recycling Center, they recycled more than 2.2 million pounds of goods. And had about 112,000 pounds of trash collected at the center, and that's from folks dropping things off that they shouldn't necessarily drop off at the recycling center.
These
And-
numbers are tons, pounds,
Pounds.
pounds.
And in 22, total pounds recycled goods was 2.2 million again. So that 2.2 number is relatively consistent year over year, but you can see that the kinds of materials fluctuate quarter to quarter and year over year, depending on, what's the new thing. And sometimes it may be that the curbside hauler has said, we're not accepting X, Y, or Z. And so people start taking that to the center, and those numbers will fluctuate because of that.
These numbers aren't right. I'm just telling you. I alone contribute 20% of the glass every quarter. I'm the only guy doing this. The mayor, you probably contribute more than I do.
I carry a few loads of glass up there every year or every couple of months.
Are you sure these aren't tons?
Their reports say in pounds.
Okay, well,
So, and it's been relatively consistent in terms of the data that they've provided. There aren't any huge swings.
500 pounds a year.
So
They like five-
we can certainly check in and make sure
Yeah.
there's not something wrong.
I think there's some decimal points in there. Because they now have gone from just a small glass recycling bin to a large glass recycling bin. And that one recycling bin probably holds everything you got up there. So.
Got it. We'll confirm
We need
it.
to understand the, where the decimal point actually is.
Understood.
And does this include the every other year hazardous waste? and
We
stuff?
get a separate report for household
You
hazardous
get a
waste.
separate report?
Yes.
Okay.
So this is literally the report that we receive every year. So we pulled the numbers directly from that, and it doesn't say in pounds, but I will confirm with Kathy to make sure. And then Ginger,
Catherine says it's tons.
Catherine says it's
Mhm.
tons.
Yes.
Okay, so their report is wrong. It is tons. There you go.
Tons.
Okay,
Sons, thank you.
all right.
I was gonna say.
We'll have them correct that on this report.
Good afternoon, everyone. So last time we were here, we talked a little bit about short-term rentals, and you had some questions regarding the apartments. And so I got a more exact detail of that for you. There were 203 captured for apartment advertisements found throughout all the different venues that we look through with our software that we have through a third party. 40 notices were sent out to 40 different apartment complexes. 30 days after the notices were sent, 19 of the apartment complexes still had active listings. Notices of violation were issued to each apartment with listings found. So there were some that we were able to identify specifically, the apartments themselves, and were able to get those removed. And after working with the management, 88 listings have been removed. 8 citations were issued, 3 different apartment complexes, and 38 units remain unidentified. What I can tell you about the 38 unidentified units is we spoke to our legal counsel, and we were told that we can go ahead and issue the property owners a notice of violation and give them 30 days to comply. And if they don't comply, then we will then issue citations to those property owners for those unresolved ones.
When you say property, we're talking about the apartment complex.
Yes, so whoever owns the apartment complex, we have to then pursue them.
Are these 38 units mainly in the same couple of apartment complexes, or are they spread around the city?
I think they're kind of spread throughout the city. There's some of the more newer, most of them are the newer ones, and they all kind of look identical, so it's really hard to pinpoint which one it is, and as management is having a difficult time identifying those units as well, so.
So you're saying management is not allowing this?
So there are some apartment complexes that do allow it. And then when they do allow it, then they have to come in for the short-term rental license. But the majority of them don't. Any other questions?
How many do we have that do allow it?
I don't know for sure. I can find out.
I mean, are you gonna allow or? is it
No, I think
fine?
it's just a handful.
Just a handful. Okay.
Yes.
A lot of HOAs don't allow it too, so I don't know if we're looking outside of apartments. But maybe some townhouses and things like that, 'cause I know someone that was getting ready to do it and their HOA was like, no. I don't know, we check on that.
I would say if they're a rental, if we know that the person is not the property owner, we do ask for permission from the owner. But I don't believe that we do ask for HOA approval when the person owns the unit themselves.
But I'm just saying HOAs don't allow it,
Right.
so
I,
we should.
I
let
see
them
what you're
know.
saying, but
Yeah.
I guess we could ask that as an additional layer.
That's a weird one. People typically don't get involved, but HOA enforces. or doesn't
Typically.
enforce.
Yeah, and I know that there are some
It's not a
HOAs.
bad idea.
Yeah. There are some HOAs that'll allow a certain percentage of the homes in their development to be able to be rented.
Yeah, but that's not normally on a short term basis, is it?
I don't know if they differentiate.
Probably gotta be governed by the covenants. Covenants are gonna determine that, we know.
We have our policy, we have our policy, and they're allowed to privately contract the way they want to privately. contract.
We only enforce whether you're licensed or not.
Right.
You know, it's up to the HOA and their covenants, that's a private issue that has to be resolved within HOA and whoever the owner is.
Oh, about the word minimum. Before you move on, did
Yes,
anybody find 400,000?
She did. Tony has your answer.
Okay, so if you take a look at each column does total. However, if you look at increase in jail services, the 425 is uniquely colored. So that number does not put across the line. So
What's called?
the increase in jail services, you'll see it's a different shade of blue.
It's a very
Oh,
slight
yeah.
difference.
Okay, so increase in jail services does not carry across, so that's your variance of 425. Once we get that number, we'll update the information.
Oh, yes.
Circumstance.
Thank you to Tony and Caroline for figuring that one out for us.
Hey, the police department needs to start them to do some.
I know. All right, next up is our capital budget assumptions. I wanted to just recap this with you all because there's a couple of changes from our workshop number one. The first item to call attention to on this one is you'll notice an addition of Veterans Park with an assumption of 2.3. This is the delta that is remaining for the completion of the construction of the project that council approved earlier this year. You'll recall at that time, we had mentioned that it would have to be included in the FY24 budget. When we were working on the FY23 comprehensive budget amendment that was tabled at the last council meeting, but you'll hear a more detailed presentation this evening on those funds. We initially included a reallocation of that amount, 2.3 million from Path 400, the trail section, to go to Veterans Park, and that would have freed up money in the capital assumptions this year. After we went back and looked at all of the projects in the budget amendment, I made the decision that we were not going to reallocate the funds from Path 400 because we have received a revised construction estimate for Path 400 that appears to put us at about 13.7 million in the hole. A deficit of 13.7 million over the life of that project of getting that one completely constructed. That includes federal funds of 15.3 million that are already obligated towards it, T-Splost allocation of 4 million, and then the deficit we're looking at is 13.7 million now. So having this 2.3 million there will allow us to continue chipping away at that deficit. We will have a T-Splost updated presentation for y'all in the next couple of weeks so that we can walk you through some of these changing projects that we've got going on here.
Does this in any way change the Veterans Park overall cost?
No,
You just filling the bucket.
correct. That's exactly right.
Even someone just sent a message saying that they can't download, that they can only get the agenda, not the packet access.
Can you, Carol, Kristen, can you look and see if you can get it there? And Natifa, we may need to see if it published it out there.
Yeah. Okay.
They may need to log out of it and log back in. Sometimes if you clear your cache in your browser, it will show up.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Okay, the next slide, the other change that has happened on our capital budget assumptions is the next one, Caroline. The video board is reflected now as studio theater. Initially, I had reported that to you all as a change for City Bar. The City Bar video screen also is going to be replaced, but it is coming out of facilities maintenance funds for fiscal year 23. And that's a cost of $148,000. That project will be completed. This is for the video wall outside of studio theater, which is heavily used for rental events, both inside the theater and outside the theater.
It's broken.
Yes, it's 5 years old. It is just, we had hoped that we were going to be able to cobble screens together, taking some from City Bar and putting them at studio theater, but it's just not working. Okay, so now we'll move on to the capital ballot and the results of the ballot ranking process this year. As a reminder, here is a list of the items that were included on your ballot for discussion and ranking by council. The next slide shows you the breakdown of how each member of council ranked projects. And then the next slide is the average score. The lower the score, the higher the priority. So we are anticipating having, where's the number? $5.8 million to spend. And those funds would be allocated based on council's ranking, 1.2 million to Lake Forest Drive, the Allen Road intersection improvement. This is the mini roundabout at Allen Road. Next would be Long Island Drive at Mount Vernon Highway intersection improvement. And I've got slides behind here to show what each of those are, again, as a reminder. Third is Morgan Falls Athletic Complex improvements at 1.5 million. Fourth, Morgan Falls pedestrian lighting. Fifth is the flood mitigation and resilience plan. And then sixth is the Abernathy Greenway enhancement, which is partial funding to round out the available funds.
Now, in the past, we've normally had funds left over. And I mean, I know one year we had so much funds left over, we did the entire list. Is there any chance of us doing that this year?
I don't think so, Councilman. Tony and I have continued to refine our budget revenue numbers, trying to see if there's any additional funds that might be available, but to keep us at our 25% fund balance reserve, I wouldn't recommend trying to do all of them on here.
Well, we'll know in a month.
We will.
We'll know better in a month. We'll know better. Like I'm getting June, so.
That's exactly right.
there
We
may be
will.
Some changes, but.
Yep.
So there's what, 1.1 million? That isn't covered for it, I mean, out of the 5.8 or,
No.
No, that's all.
right, okay, and it's just that first column is 5.8, so there.
So we only have 5.8 available to be allocated. The number has decreased.
Oh, okay, that's what.
Mhm.
The total amount of all those projects together is 12.4.
Correct.
We have 5.8.
Yeah, I think when presented, it was more like 6.
It was 6.9.
It was initially,
Yeah.
but we had to revise that number for a number of reasons, primarily the 2.3 million not being available for Veterans Park reduced it. We also went back through and adjusted some of our revenue numbers. Some went up, some went down. And in the next budget workshop next Tuesday, I'll walk you through line by line the revenue numbers and our thought process on where we are estimating them and why we are estimating them at that. Question?
So you made the decision. Earlier, you talked about the Veterans Park was going to be funded from, pulled over from another project that was. Not going to spend as much money as you thought. But then you changed your mind and you took that money, instead of applying it to Veterans Park, to put it to the trails.
No, sir, it was coming from Path 400. It was,
At 400.
that money is already sitting in the Path 400 project.
Oh, is it?
Made the decision to not remove it from Path 400.
I got it. I
Mhm.
understand.
Yeah. So other than the Veterans Park, was that, I missed, were there any new assumptions in here? Okay.
No, sir. Would you all like us to walk through the slides behind here for the ones that are being funded? They're just in your packet, or excuse me, that would be included in the recommended budget.
It's in the region.
Okay,
Well, I have a question. The Lake Forest Drive, Allen Road also originally included Northwood. Can you explain why Northwood was dropped and then we can get into the weeds, I've had several people ask about a stop sign there.
Northwood was not included in the most recent presentation. The total cost we anticipate for Lake Forest and Allen is 2.4 million. Northwood, the traffic engineers believe that the best solution would be a three-way stop there. So that will take care of both options. Any questions? Our next budget meeting and workshop will be next Tuesday. That's when you'll get the line item detail. We'll walk through all of the departments, the staffing numbers. It'll be a longer meeting. If there are other questions that council has or things that you would like answers on between now and then, please don't hesitate to let us know and we'll get those answers to you as quickly as possible.
All right, anything else? If I may, there was a question at one point about the Morgan Falls pedestrian lighting. Not being a needed item because of safety concerns. Is that shifted from this list to something else?
No, sir. It was a ballot item all along, which it was not deemed to be a safety. It's more of an enhancement for the area. So
Does
that,
if we change it, does it qualify as a safety project? Does that mean the money comes out of another budget and that frees up money to spend it here for something else?
it wouldn't free up money. It would, if you want it to go as a capital assumption, it would just take the amount of money available for the ballot to go towards a capital assumption.
Okay, so there's not,
Yes, the money's got to come from somewhere.
yeah, no.
Yeah.
And it did hit the list.
Yeah, for example, there was impact fees that covered that. That'd be a separate deal. That's not the right we're talking about here.
No,
It's not impact fee eligible. That project.
No, sir. We wish.
I'm just trying to figure out a way
I-
to skin the cat.
I agree.
I have a question here.
Yes, sir.
Since the improvements at Windsor Parkway and Roswell Road did not make the list,
Yes, sir.
does that mean that the wayfinding sign that we were supposed to put there is not gonna make the list either?
No, the wayfinding has already been funded. Remember, we had kind of put the pause on that one until we determined if it was cost effective for us to do this right lane, right turn lane.
Right,
We'll be moving forward with the wayfinding signage.
okay, thank you.
Mhm.
By the way, if you come up to Sandy Springs from the south, you'll see there is a mural on the gateway.
The pig. flying.
It has a flying pig on it, but there's a mural on there that says, "Welcome to Sandy Springs."
Mhm.
And it was done by the new owner of that shopping center.
We were very excited to see that.
Yeah, they did. I had a real good look at it today because I stopped at the red light right there and it looks very nice.
As far as the bridge enhancement designs, it didn't make it, but we're putting the bridges. I'm trying to understand how.
The bridge enhancement design is a different project, and we are also going to have an update from PCID for you all at an upcoming meeting. They are planning to do some bridge enhancements as well. That bridge enhancement is That one was going to be Mount Vernon, partially funded by T-Splosh, Georgia 400 bridge enhancements. And that was strictly design work. It was not actually construction dollars. So that may likely come back at a future point.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Well, now we got 2.5 hours, 3 hours.